for anyone listening and watching, there's a beer. It's called Gimme S'mores.
Yes.
And we have gotten it before because my wife is a connoisseur of all things s'mores. If it says s'mores on it, she wants it, whatever it is. And it tastes like beer and s'mores came together. It's wild. Where did that come from? Hey there, Omaha. Welcome into another episode of Restaurant Hoppen. I'm your host, Dan Hoppen. Now, today, Nebraska Brewing Company is a massive tap room, a brewery, and a great hangout spot in Papillion. But some 20 years ago, it started as just a guy trying to brew beer in his basement. It is just incredible to think of what it's become now. That's a story that I want to hear and I want to help tell. And that's why I have my guests on the show today, Paul and Kim Kavulak. Guys, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having us.
So, Nebraska Brewing Company, there are a lot of breweries, bars, tap rooms, sports bars, whatever it may be. There are a lot of places where you can drink beer in Omaha. Certainly more than there were in 2007 when you guys got started. But when you look at Nebraska Brewing Company, what is it that you think makes you guys unique and special? What sets Nebraska Brewing Company apart?
Kim, you go first, and I'll toss in there.
I think that for me, that when we started 20 years ago, when the idea was in our head and we opened in 2007, our goal was to bring craft beer really to the community, and it was barely here at the time. So we wanted to take people on this journey that we were going on as well. But I think what really kind of makes us and still makes us unique is that we are literally family owned. We have been since the beginning of time. My mom still works for us. She'll be 84 this year. Our children have grown up in the business, and our guests and people who have become our family have seen them grow up, and we're all part of this big family. I mean, I think that makes us a little unique compared to a lot of other places.
It's funny. We were one of the big trade shows for the craft brewing industry, and I heard one of the luminaries up there on stage. He said, craft beer is great, but really what makes the business and the way you're able to sell the beer is your entertainers. And oddly, first of all, I thought that was a ludicrous statement given the fact that we've invested so much time, effort, and energy into making quality beers. But the reality is you can go to any corner bar and get a beer. You can go to any corner bar and get our beer. But what brings you into our tap room? And ultimately, it is the people. And we need to give you reasons to stop by our location. And ultimately, I think that dovetails into where you're headed later with, all of the community events and the things that we do to support those around us. And sure, first and foremost, it's about the business and it's about us. But really, when you look at who we've become, it's about the community and the people that, embrace us and want to be part of us.
Okay, well, let's we don't need to wait. Let's talk about it right now. Let's talk about that. And I think that there's kind of two sides to that community, and you guys touched on both of it. There's the community within your family, and there's also the community that, like the found community that you've created. How have you been able to create community at this brewery?
Fire away.
Well, I think that, again, when we opened, we loved beer, and we opened in 2007 with a brew pub because at the time that made the most sense. We had both come from different aspects. His grandparents owned a bar and my grandparents had owned restaurants. So we kind of had it in our blood, but never really did it for a living. So it made sense given where we were to open that way. So I think building on that and fast forwarding our real passion for the beer and telling the story, I really think that's what people gravitate to. They gravitate to hearing the story of how we started. And Paul will probably talk about it at some point today. He was the home brewer and how we got to where he got and how he ultimately just literally one day quit his corporate job and said, if we're going to do this, we have to do it 100% and quit his job that day. And how you have all the skin in the game at that point, and you have to really make it work and find that passion and carry that passion to other people. And those people gravitate to that.
Yeah, so there's...
it's kind of hard to say it better than that.
It is, and I'm sitting here wondering, how do I, tell the story along with, explain who we are today. And I think when you sit there and you have a beer, and this is how, Kim wound up with 50 Mile March, and so I'm a veteran. And ultimately, we just realized one day that we can help, and there were groups of people in our establishment. And we were hanging out with them, and we're like, can we help? How can we help? How can we be a part of what you do? And how can we, especially for the veterans community, how can we make sure that, who we are helps who you are? And, we can get back to the episode of Cardinal Pale Ale and how the business started. But
I think ultimately we realized that, I mean, the beer is our passion, clearly. And when we closed our brew pub, which we can talk about at some point, it was because we decided the beer was really our passion and that's where we wanted to focus. But at some point, it's like the beer is really awesome, but how can we be a bigger part of the community? How can we help people around us?
Well, I know personally, a way that you've kind of touched me is you've helped several of my friends who are food truck friends or, pop-up owners who are like, we need a spot. I mean, we're talking Terrible Gerald's, Hyde Slides Burgers and Fries, the Bougie Brown Box, Spacca Napoli, and right now, Comeback City Pizza is like inside your brewery. Yeah. I mean, yes, that helps you to some extent if you can say, hey, we've got a special event tonight. You can come out and get pizza and get a beer. But you're doing that because you're giving them an opportunity to showcase something. Like you're supporting each other all at once. So I just want to say that that's just a small part of the community that you guys have created. But I've noticed it, and all I hear is positive comments from people from these establishments, and they're just like, these guys treat us great. They give us an opportunity. They give us a chance. And it's businesses supporting each other. That's so cool to see. Small businesses supporting other small businesses in the community. It's huge. And if you don't, I mean, we have been the beneficiary of that when we were up and coming and we were very new and we didn't know what we didn't know. We had some really big breweries kind of lend a hand and say, here's what you should do, or come here. We'll help you do your lab testing. We'll help you do all of these things that we didn't know people would do. But so we got to pay it forward then. And we still do. Okay, so real quick, if anyone's listening to this and they're just like, I like breweries. I want to go have a beer and have some pizza. Nebraska Brewing Company, the brewery is located just south of 108th and Harrison. So that's where you go. Yes. I want to establish some roles here as we talk about this. So obviously, Paul, you're the brewer. This was your passion. That's where it started. Kim, on your website, you are listed as the chick who gets shit done. Yes. So I want to, as you guys look at your roles and responsibilities within Nebraska Brewing Company, how would you define those?
Well, I think for me, it's it's funny. If you're going to get behind the wheel of a boat in the morning, you got to make sure that you don't hit the rocks. You stay where you want to fish, and you chart the course on a daily basis. I used to be the brewer, and when the brew pub early days, when we found out that we probably need to take tighter control of the reins, I kind of stepped away from mashing in and playing the game. And Tyson, our lead brewer,
Tyson one of the most talented brewers that I've ever met in my life.
And coupled up with Tony,
Tony Munch,
they are the brewing individuals that really make the recipes happen. And there are the days where you sit down and say, you know what, let's where's the industry going? Do we want to chase the industry? Do we want to do something over here on the side and see if that gets a spark? And that's kind of, I hate to say it's just an idea thing, but business side ideas, it's funny. Quality control. Well, we had an episode there with China years ago where ultimately, I've got to taste every single beer that's made. And, some people laugh and say, damn the luck. But that's part of it. If you're a chef, you got to taste everything that's going out to your customers. Same thing with beer.
What's your role, Kim?
I take all those things and I put them into action. So very small, in a nutshell, he flies at 50,000 feet and is like making sure that all these things are like, here's the ideas, here's what we got to do, here's what we got to do. And then I make it literally happen. I'm the field general, working with our entire team, with our vendors, with anybody who I need to, coming up with ideas for events and making sure the events are coming together, working with which are now our philanthropy partners, all those things. So that's kind of what I do.
Okay. Let's talk about a little bit of beer. So you guys have produced so many beers over the years that you have to separate them into 5 categories. You've got your core series, the reserved series, the limited series, and seasonal series. I guess that's 4 categories. I promise.
And there's seltzers in there too.
Well,
Okay, there we go. Thank you. I was going to say, I promise I'm good at counting. I
Right.
apparently only get to 4.
our pilot series is probably I would throw that in there
Pilot
as well.
series. There we go. But we got to start with that core series. It's got 5 beers inside of it. I think it's 5 beers. I don't know how to count anymore. What stands out about those 5 beers to you? What makes them the core? And as all these other beers are shifting, you're bringing some into the lineup, some taken out. Those are the 5 that are always going to stay there. What is it about those 5?
Yeah, I think this kind of parallels what the industry is doing today. That our core beers are the classic styles, and these styles are when you think of well-made craft, or you get into certain countries like Germany makes Hefeweizens, and we decided that we're going to make these core beers, classic styles. We're going to make them incredibly well, and so Cardinal Pale Ale, that's the one that started the company. It was patterned initially against Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. When I was starting to drink beer, I said, man, I want to try to make a beer like that someday. And ultimately we did. So I won't go through all of them, but rest assured that each one of them, especially the Hefeweizen and the Pale Ale, have taken medals in Europe at European Beer Star. So here's this guy, in, call it Omaha, Nebraska. We've lived in La Vista, Cedar Creek, all that stuff. So when you're experimenting, you hope that you make something good. We took those recipes, took them to the brewers. The brewers said, hey, this is really cool, but let's tweak this, let's tweak that. And, as a team, we elevated those core beers to a stature that in Omaha, Nebraska, you can find some of the planet's best beers. And the industry will deviate, it'll go off, and it will do this thing for a while and that thing for a while, but the classics remain, the core beers.
Well, and I think what we did with that core series was try to say, let's appeal to a spectrum of beer drinkers. And again, dial back to 2007, and craft beer was really just reemerging and barely emerging in Nebraska. That said, we said, some people will like hops, some people won't. Some people will like multi-beers, some people won't. Some people will like these. So we took what we thought would be a good spectrum of beers for the craft beer drinkers, and those have continued to be a good base for our core series over the years.
Okay. So when we're talking about limited series beers or seasonal beers, the beers that get added to the menu, they might get taken off at some point too. This might be less of you guys' day-to-day now, but I'm sure Tyson keeps you, looped in somewhat on the process. I'm just so curious, what's the process, like the R&D process of coming up with a beer? Like, do you start with a flavor profile in mind? Is it, I'm at another bar and I drink something, I'm like, whoa, this is excellent. I want to try and make some version of this myself. Then where do you, like...
All of those things. It's literally all of those things. Sometimes it's, we've actually named beers before and said, what would be a good beer style to go with that name? Or, we're trending this way. We actually, Hop God was, we were inspired to make Hop God, I don't even know how many years ago, after visiting Green Flash in San Diego. And we're like, whoa, A, that's an excellent beer. And B, nobody in Nebraska is doing anything like that. We think we can. Tyson was with us that trip, and then Tyson comes back and he goes to work. Tyson and Tony, our brewers, and they go to work on writing the recipe and then maybe brewing a pilot batch. And so it just really depends. It's literally all of those things. Sometimes we'll sit down and we'll just be like, okay, let's have a few beers and talk about what we want to do the next year for our limited series. And then we just get crazy and like, I still want to do a mint julep beer. Tyson tells me no. I still am going to get him to do it at some point.
I mean, you got him to do a s'mores beer.
I know, right? And people love it. See,
Which I want to. I mean, where did that one come from? For anyone listening and watching, there's a beer. It's called Gimme S'mores.
Yes.
And we have gotten it before because my wife is a connoisseur of all things s'mores. If it says s'mores on it, she wants it. Whatever it is. And it tastes like beer and s'mores came together.
Know.
It's wild. Where did that come from?
All of the recipes at some point involve drinking beer, sometimes drinking beer heavily. And, I think we get inspiration from other beers and other people and the industry. And, you take that back to the team and you say, here's where we want to be. And we go through a pilot process and, we'll look into different ingredients, pure vanilla. And vanillas with this particular beer have a lot to do with it. So It wasn't the first time out. It wasn't the third time out. It took us quite a few iterations to create a beer that we thought was in the right zone.
Do you know what's a great story with that beer, though? Because I have lots of stories. I love to tell stories.
We're on a podcast.
Yeah.
This is like the ultimate way to tell stories.
I love to tell stories. So that beer we were going after a vanilla brown. We knew that was the style we wanted. And independently, like 5 different people went, smells like a s'more. And that's how we're like, okay.
Let's put a label on it.
Completely independently, they were like, that's a s'more. And so we knew the style. And we always like to come up with clever names or things that really will associate. Oh, my wife loves s'mores, so she's going to drink that. So sometimes it hits. And that one, literally independently, people smelled it and they said, that's a s'more.
Mm-hmm.
We have in the core series, West Coast IPA. And West Coast IPAs are now making their comebacks. In fact, a lot of the classics are now making a comeback. People are a little palate fatigued, on the edges of craft beer. So at the end of the day, you want a good lager. You want something that's just beer. Well, when we started playing around with this West Coast IPA, we thought, let's talk to some experts. So we get a hold of Dr. Bill out of Stone Brewing Company. I said, Dr. Bill, here's what we want to do. We want to make a good West Coast IPA, but there's not one that we want to copy or clone. We want you to collect every West Coast IPA you can find from the West Coast. And he did. He sent in this massive styrofoam cooler of West Coast IPAs, and we just sat around drinking beer and drinking more beer and, pushed some away that didn't exemplify what we thought were part of that class. And by the time we were done, we wanted a piece of that beer, a piece of this beer, 2 pieces of that beer.
And ideas of our own.
Here you go, Tyson. Figure this out. Yeah. And it's that one's held its own. It's been out there for, 18, 19 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's give a shout out to Tyson because we've mentioned him several times, but I think he deserves a minute or two.
Well,
of
he's
shine.
the chef in the restaurant, right?
Yeah.
He is.
Well, I mean, like you said, Kim, like so much of this company is family, but he's like one of the major components that came from outside the family.
Yeah.
Basically, who is he? What are his credentials? What makes him awesome at his job?
Well, here's a good story for you.
Yeah, here's a great story.
You guys got all kinds of stories.
We have so many stories.
I love it.
20 years in. So
I know.
We were under construction at Shadow Lake, and I even forget what phase it was. This person.
We were still dirt floors. We still had dirt floors.
Kept bugging the crap out of us, sending mail, sending email. I want to be a part of your team, but we already had a brewer.
Well, his wife was also a part, who also at one point worked for us, who is a force all of her own, and they have her own brand, but that's a different story. Shout out to the Mud Puddles. But she was also like, hey, like, I just want to make sure you got my husband's resume. And they were so excited. Again, 2007, early 2007, there are no craft brewers. So people were excited about a craft brewery coming in. So, okay, sorry.
No. So it goes on, and finally, and I guess that's a way to get into somebody's brain is you just keep repeating the message. And I happen to be judging Nebraska State Fair, and I judged Best of Show. So let's call it 5 beers. I don't remember how many, and it's very easy for me. You take a drink, push it away, take a drink, pull it forward until that moment in time where there's one that remains, and you say that's Best of Show. You get the other judges to agree with you or whatever, and they announced the winner, and I said that's the guy.
But he had been, at some point, he came to us and said he was changing careers. He was leaving construction, and he wasn't really sure what he wanted to do. And we're like, well, we already have a brewer. We can't really afford 2 of them. And he's like, how about if I just hang out with you guys for a while and work and see if it's something I even want to do? So we're like, okay, you're going to work for free? Okay. And so he did work for us for free for a couple months. And then Paul judged him, and we said, okay, we got to hire this kid. Again, funny story. I didn't realize that he was as close to my age as I thought. He seemed like a kid at the time. But yeah, I said we gotta find a way to hire this kid. So we hired him on kind of a stipend, half part-time basis for a while. We're like, we got to figure out how to hang on to him because we knew immediately how talented he was. And fast forward,
he was an assistant brewer at the time, and it's funny because even though I was the original brewer, there was no way when we started running the company that I could brew and run. So we got to the point where, I forget the timeline. Let's say it was a year, and we just weren't, I'm going to say this politically correct, we just weren't happy with the way things were going. and ultimately, it came down to, Tyson, you could be the lead brewer today if you choose to be. And he's like, I guess.
yeah,
And there it was, at that moment in time, he became the lead brewer, and he'll admit, we'll all admit, we didn't know what we were doing back then. So we did what we thought was the right thing, and we fell into our own places, and here we are.
Yeah.
Here you are. You mentioned so many of the beers that you come up with are just random, or you come up with the name first, or you get inspired just by something that you run into or something you drink. There's one specifically that was not random, and that was the beer that you guys did with the Omaha Storm Chasers. I mean, not only do they feature several of your current beers inside of Warner Park, but you guys got to make like the beer of the Storm Chasers. It's the Ale Storm Blonde Ale. Like, that's a really big deal.
Yeah.
How did that partnership come to be?
Gosh, I think we got approached by Marty Cordero. So they wanted their own beer. And that was, again, there are a lot of minor league teams that have their own beers now. This was like cutting edge when Marty
there
came to us.
There weren't then. They may have been one of the first, if not the first.
Yeah, and Marty, if you've not ever talked to Marty, I'm sure you know him.
I've had him on the podcast. Great dude.
Yeah, he's such a great dude, and he's so creative and such a visionary when it comes to ideas and moving projects forward and creating projects. And so he came to us and wanted to create a beer, and they made it a whole public thing, and we decided on the style. We spent a lot of time talking about what style it should be, what would be drinkable in the summer. And then we had they actually sponsored a voting contest with the public. And so we actually, I probably still have these written ever because I save everything. Like we had come up with like probably 75 different names. And then we, as a group with them, whittled it down to, 5, call it. And they did a public contest about, vote for your favorite name, and Ailstorm was it.
Like, when you get approached with a project like that, where do you even start? I mean, do you start with the name? Do you start with the flavor, the color, Nebraska ingredients? Like, where do you even start?
In that particular, and I feel like it's different depending on what beer you're talking about or what project you're talking about. In this particular instance, it was going to be baseball. We knew it was going to be a baseball beer. So what are you doing? You're outside. It's going to be hot. What can you drink when you're hot? What do you want to drink when it's that hot outside? So that was the driving force about, okay, it's going to be one of these kinds of styles. And so then we all decided together. We tasted beers, tasted different styles, and Paul's got a story.
Oh, yeah, it's another one that we were approached out of the blue. It was. We
won't talk about that right now. But I know, yeah, is it 311?
Yeah. So way through a weird pattern of people.
But similar to that, though, I mean, with this particular project, 311 approached us. It was a project that involved 311, the band.
Cigar City, Rock Brothers, and they wanted to make a beer for 311. And they said, we want it to smell like weed. We're like, okay, well, I'm not really.
So in that case, we're like, okay, how do you do that? So that it was a very dank smelling amber ale. But in the case of, Ailstorm was, right, first of all, it was like, let's work together. We were excited. We were, what was it, 2010? So we were maybe 2 or 3 years old, still figuring it out. And you start with, gosh, what are you going to drink when you're outside? And then we go through those styles, and then we work. And they had some specific ideas about what they thought they wanted as well. Some of those we had to convince them, maybe, I think.
That's such a great idea.
Yeah, maybe not in the summertime outside kind of thing. But, that's kind of how that one started.
Okay, so, Paul, you got started on a kitchen stove back in 1992. I found a quote from you that said, back then, a can and a pack of yeast were all it took to fuel the passion. What got you into brewing originally?
Yeah, it was a lot easier back then. I think there's a lot of IT guys that wound up doing craft beer. And I think at some level, it was just the pursuit of the numbers. Can you hit your numbers? I mean, if you're brewing, do you get the right specific gravity? And there are so many things that, need to be measured. And ultimately, I think a lot of those guys like beer too. And the beer, it's funny. And I'm sure every one of them thinks the same way. When you make those first home brews and you take it to your friends, like, this is amazing, isn't it? And they're all like, you sure? Gosh, a lot of it was so horrible back then. And each time...
No one says it's horrible.
Well, each time you make a beer, you're like, hey, you know what? If I tweak it this way, I can advance to the next level. And before you know it, you're playing with all grain, and you're messing with different hops, and that leads us into the Cardinal Pale Ale story, which and Sierra Nevada. So I was chasing a Sierra Nevada. I won't call it a clone, but I wanted to be in a similar space. I didn't want to make their beer. I wanted to make my beer. And I'd done so many iterations of this beer. We were brewing out of the basement back then, and it was some elevated equipment. And I remember coming home from the day job, and the day job involved a suit and tie, and I went downstairs.
But this is many years forward when we built a house and we actually built a brewing room at this point. So it went from just brewing on the stove and just kind of this minor hobby to, okay, when we built this house, we built a brewing room that had slope floors and quick gas disconnects and a 3-well sink. Like it was.
Shoot, yeah, this is legit.
So well, it took the hobby to literally to the next level. At that time, there still was no real, like, we're going to do this for a living. It was just like an elevated hobby. Everybody has one, right? I mean,
oh, sure. I mean, what are we doing right now? This is my elevated hobby.
Right. You know, cyclists spend thousands of dollars on bicycles. You know,
Correct.
Everybody's got like something they love, and this was the passion that he had.
So this was the moment where it was. I pulled the top off the fermenter. It had been steeped in hops for, the right amount of time, and I was looking for a nose. I knew I had the base beer done, the alcohol level, all that stuff, but I couldn't capture the nose. And I pulled the fermenter top off, and I put my head down next to it, and it wasn't where I wanted it to be. And I was so absolutely disgusted with the amount of time, effort, and energy that I had poured into that beer and still couldn't achieve the goal. And this is expensive equipment. In my mind's eye, I was kicking it over and just letting it go down the drain, and that was the end of it. And it's not that I thought better of it. I was just like, okay, I'm over. Different way to destroy the batch. I went into my little chest freezer, and I took all of the remaining Cascade hops, all of it. They were leaf hops, so it was the right stuff for dry hopping. And I just dumped it in, just willy-nilly. I'd never used that phrase before.
I was going to say.
And I took the lid to the fermenter, and I threw it back on, and it made enough contact that it didn't let air in, and the CO2 was still, the yeast was respirating. It was still pushing in the right direction. Like, fine, I'm done. I went back 2 weeks later thinking I'd have this massive mess to clean up. And the first thing I did is pull the top off. I'm going to, get into this thing. And I went, holy shit, that's it. And I'm like, I got to finish this beer. And so then I cleaned the top, put the lid on it, screwed it down, and I filtered it. I had a filter and all that fun stuff, and got to the end, carved it up. And I remember the moment, put it in a glass. Kim was there. I'm like, you got to taste this. And I held it up, and just like those weird ass, brewing commercials where you have the brewer that's got the light behind it, like, that's it. And I said, we could sell this beer.
Yeah.
And that was catalyst.
But then he also had to go back and figure out how much hops he had actually dumped in there because he had no idea. And so there's
reverse engineer your anger.
Yes. There's so much science and specificity and detail to brewing, and more than people could ever imagine. And then he's like, oh, I don't have any idea how much I dumped in there. So, yes, we had to reverse engineer that.
And fortunately, the bag was finite, and the recipes that I had used it for, I carved out so much. I knew how much remained. So I finally, figured out how to do it again. And Cardinal is today what it was back then.
And what do you remember, Kim, about that eureka moment? Like, do you remember tasting it and just being like, oh, my gosh, he is right? Or was it like, we're mostly there. Let's keep experimenting. Yeah. What do you remember about that?
Yeah, I probably, I'm always a big supporter, but I feel like I thought, yeah, that's pretty good. We could do something with that.
Okay. Now, you guys, I believe, referenced the famous lunch now, where the call was made to quit the job. I've heard this story in my research in a couple different forms, but I want to hear it from you guys now. First of all, how long was this lunch from this discovery of the Cardinal Pale Ale?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I think it was quite some time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I look back on that moment sometimes. I'm like, well, needed to be done. And I look back too and I go, oh, that was brilliant.
Well, and it was probably like a couple years because he was like, oh, gosh, we could do this. And I'm like, I don't know, man. You got a really good job and we had a really good life. And so then in probably the latter part of 2005, and I would call it most of 2006, we spent a lot of time writing the business plan, which if you've ever written a business plan is horrible. But we worked with a banker friend who really kind of held our hand and let us like down the path. Like, okay, if you're going to do this, if you're serious, here are the steps you got to take. And so he helped us get through that business plan phase and poked every single hole in it that you could possibly poke in it. Like, why would you want to quit your day job? Why do you want to quit your really good job and your, all the things? And so we decided, yep, we're going to do it. So I was not working full time at that point. So I was running down a lot of the detail stuff at that point. And then we were at lunch that day. So it was probably April of 2007, I'm going to say.
Geez, that's horrible. You remember that specifically.
I could probably tell you the day, but.
Well, we're sitting there and I just went back and forth. And I said, if we're going to work this hard for somebody else, we should do this for us. And
he said, he said, if we don't do this 100%, we're not going to be able to do it. And I said, yep, you're right.
Burn the boats.
Yeah.
I didn't know what that meant. I didn't realize he was going to take out his phone at lunch and call his boss.
She nodded yes. I'm like, okay. Whipped out the phone. Hey, boss, let's chat when I get back.
I was just looking at him like, what just happened?
And that was it.
So, well, we got all the skin in the game now.
Now, I was very fortunate. I worked for a very good company. My employers, my boss, direct boss above that boss, they loved me. They did what they could for me. And the moment I resigned, they understood and took care of me for a period of time after the resignation to make sure that we landed on our feet and got moving in the right direction. And it helped a lot. So, we owe them a lot.
I mean, what was that feeling like for you guys? Because, you mentioned, hey, we could sell this beer, a couple years prior when you figure out the Cardinal Pale Ale. Like, I'm sure the idea has been percolating in your mind, like, man, what if we could do this full time? This would be so cool. But to actually do it, to actually make that phone call, to actually burn the boats and say there is no going back. This is it. What was that feeling like?
I think at that moment
we might have different emotions.
Yeah, I think at that moment there wasn't a ton of trepidation, fear, anxiety. It's just like we had that plan. We knew what we were going to do, and this was part of it, was to move forward. And it's interesting because when we started in the industry, there were 1,400 breweries, and I could tell you 95%, I could name them all. I could probably name the owners, the brewers. I could probably name 95% of those. I could name 80% of all of those brands. And in the Great Recession,
which happened like 2 minutes after we opened.
Freaking day we opened, that brewery count in the U.S. fell to 1,200, over the next 12 to 14, 18 months. And it was a very tight-knit community. And it was, let's call it, easier to be the brewery in a market. And then, you fast forward to today and we're less than 10,000 breweries, but those 10,000 breweries they're all struggling. They're all trying to make their own way. They're all, loud in social media, and it's created a little bit of a cacophony and some difficulty in finding the good stuff, which is where, it's an interesting parallel because, I've watched you, I've followed you, I follow a lot of the restaurants that you are enamored with and we love too. Those guys stand out. They stand out in the crowd, and there's a billion of those, but look at these guys. And today, we carry forward the accolades and the awards and that kind of stuff. So we have a little bit of an easier go of it. But I think if we had still had 1,200 breweries today versus 10,000 today, I think, it'd be a different picture. And every day we wake up, I go, all right, what are we dealing with today? You have to adapt. You have to, push forward. And so I think the initial path that we put ourselves on is still what we're dealing with today.
Yeah, I would say, though, that to answer your question, that, like, he probably felt very liberated because he was working a full daytime job and I was doing all the stuff. So in the evening, then it would be like, okay, here's what we did to catch up or, just kind of regroup. I was like, wow, we're all in now. This is real. And not that it wasn't before, but it was like really real at that point. So we knew that we just had to go head down and do whatever we had to do to make it work.
Okay, so you mentioned you've been meeting with individuals. You've been trying to figure out what does this look like. If we would decide to do this full time. Well, the decision gets made. Where do you even get started? Like, was it finding the brew pub location first? Like, what did you even do first? How did you get going?
Yeah, I feel like that's like once we got through the business plan and we knew this was going to be, you have to sell it to bankers and all those kinds of fun things, and we knew kind of what our starting lineup of beers was going to be. It was like, okay, here's the concept. I think really the biggest thing for us at the time was to find the location because, Upstream existed downtown at that point, still there. There wasn't really much else in Omaha at the time, was there?
We targeted the La Vista, Millard, Papillion area.
I grew up in Ralston, so we kind of knew that area of town about Bellevue. Like, they really didn't have anything like that. And then we came across Shadow Lake, which was brand new and up and coming. We're like, wow, this looks like a really cool spot to be. And there's going to be a lot of traffic, and it's going to be perfect for us.
Yeah, another brilliant decision.
I don't think it was a bad decision. I don't think that was a bad decision.
We love the establishment. It's just that we went in with a bar that was set very high. Here's your rent. Here's your overhead. Here's, you got to hire X number of employees. And one of the first things that I encountered was a difference in people, difference in personnel. I came out of a IT environment. I was a senior vice president. I had people that worked for me that would never call in sick. They never had a flat tire. And then you try to run a restaurant. I'm like, what do you mean? Does this guy actually have 4 tires? They're all flat right now. Yeah. Anyway, so it was a lot of moments where you wake up and you're like, okay, we're adapting, we're shifting gears and making it happen.
I think the location was probably the biggest thing. And that at the time, it made perfect sense for us.
And that opened in 2007.
Right.
In May of 2007 is when Shadow Lake opened, and we opened in November of 2007.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you mentioned that there were some complications with that, and maybe it wasn't the perfect set of circumstances.
Perfect place to get started.
Right.
Yep.
But still, like, this is, this has been your dream for some time. You quit your job to do this. I mean, when you actually opened that thing to the public, even if it wasn't exactly what you wanted it to be, what was that feeling like?
It was overwhelming. The number of people that streamed through those doors was unexpected and absolutely overwhelming. And that's when you find the cracks. Oh my gosh, we don't have enough carbon dioxide. We don't have enough cooler space. We're not changing kegs fast enough.
It was cool. I don't care what you say. It was cool.
It was. So
it was cool. I mean, all like, he remembers all the bad things, and all I remember is like, yes, there were problems, and yes, there were like lighting issues and air conditioning.
That's
all the weird,
true.
all the environmental things that we have to overcome. I'm always the cheerleader. I'm like, this is cool.
All these people we got to meet,
we can fix all that stuff. This is cool.
Warren Buffett was in for the launch of the Ale Storm.
Yeah.
And the rest of the guys in the industry, they found their way in, and
I will say, to this day, it continues to be cool. Again, I have so many stories, good, bad, and ugly, seriously, but what we do continues to be super cool, and the people we've gotten to meet along the way is super cool, and there's just no other way for me to
when we woke up today and we were going to do this interview, I came in going, okay, another interview. Now I'm like freaking pumped, man. Let's go move some more beer.
I could tell stories, and we kind of joked amongst ourselves, because again, Tyson's been with us, we'll be 18 in November, so 17 and a half years, plus, a little before that. So we've known him. Our second brewer, Tony, has been with us, I think, 8 years in March. So much of our team has been with us for so much of this. We're like, we really want to sit around a table and do this and just tell the stories and just
Tony and Dylan were college roommates. That's how he wound up there.
Yeah, our oldest son, two of our 3 children work for us, but just to reminisce and be able to talk about the cool stuff we've been able to do, the people we've been able to meet, people who continue to be a part of our life and support us in really cool ways. Like for me, cool is the best word.
Okay, well, this is going to be an impossible question, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Okay.
Give me just 1 or 2, 3, whatever it is, just cool stories. When you say that, the cool people we've met, the things we've gotten to do, like when you're getting jacked, there are memories that pop to the front of your brain. What are those? Tell a couple of those stories.
Okay, so I hate to give a story and to really understand it, if you're not in the industry, it would take a lot of detail. But when we first started barrel aging, we didn't know what we were doing. But we knew, another one of those things where we were cork dorks, wine people, before we ever got into beer. And we discovered this particular beer. And I was like, man, this would be great with Chardonnay. And we're like, okay, this should be barrel aged in a Chardonnay barrel. So how do we do this? And back then, Vinny Trelurzo, Russian River, they were the first brewery to play around with Chardonnay barrels for the sake of, they were souring.
They were souring.
They were souring beers, but they were using chard. and Sam Calagione of Russian River. He was out there
Dogfish.
doing. Yes, sorry, Dogfish Head.
That's why it keeps me around.
So we're like, okay, so we need to get a hold of these guys, and these were still are the industry giants.
Garrett at Brooklyn Brewing.
Yep, send them an email, talk to them, pick up the telephone and talk to them, and they're giving us enough pieces to put this stuff together. And we launched a beer. Back then it was called Chardonnay Blonde. I didn't know enough to know that was an illegal name. I created a label for it. We launched this beer, and man, it was good. And we're at one of the industry trade shows, and I don't think we'd won a medal with it yet. I think we had just launched it, and I'm with the feds, the TTB, and I'm like, man, I'm really proud of this beer. Check out this label. And they're like, who approved that label? And we're
like, huh?
Dumbfounded.
We have to label approval? What is that?
And these are the guys that can either throw you in jail or help you along. And they're like, okay, look, we're going to turn our heads on this one, and we're going to, show you what you need to do. So it was no longer Chardonnay Blonde. It became Mélange à Trois, blend of 3 oak wine and beer. And we're like, yeah, this is great. We run out, and we win a GABF gold medal with it.
Yeah, before that, go ahead.
It is the best in the nation. And then
it's a 4-time medal winner, but fine.
Starts to get attention, and here comes
oh no,
Menage a Trois.
Yeah, Sutter Home.
Sutter Home. They're like, hey, we got a trademark on that. So then it plunged us into this trademark area of brewing where we just wanted to make really cool beer.
Yeah.
And back then, the trademark issue, God, that was another era that was, you'd get drug into so many rabbit holes with people chasing trademarks. And we had one beer, Black Betty, that, guy really didn't have a brewery. They just had trademark names, and he started chasing us. And anyway, that was a story unto itself. That particular beer, I think there are 1 or 2 others out in the nation that have won 4 GABF medals with one beer. Yeah. And there aren't many. So call us one of 3.
One of my first cool stories. Well, it's so hard because the first couple of years were just so, it's blind because you're just so busy doing the things and learning the things. But I referenced Green Flash earlier. So we had gone to a conference in San Diego and toured Green Flash because they were a big brewery in San Diego at the time, and had this beer. And we came back, and Tyson went to work with his genius and made what became known as Hop God. So we had become friends with the owners and brewer at Hop God, or at Green Flash rather, and we were at a World Beer Cup conference in Chicago. So we meet him in the lobby, and we're like, "Hey, who are you guys sitting with?" Nobody. Okay, let's all sit together. We're in the same category, and we're like, "Wouldn't it be hilarious if we beat you guys?" We did, but it was our first major medal. We won a World Beer Cup. For me, they were excited for us because the industry was so like that at the time, and they were excited for us, and we were excited, and it was our first medal, and we were just lost our minds. And they were so gracious to us, and we continued to be friends for years. But that was one cool story for me. It was like, okay, we're kind of legit. We're not just doing this for fun. We're actually legit. We want to win many more medals, thankfully, because of our brewing genius team and our entire group that helps us run this business. But that was one for me. And then one other story is and this is true today. The day we opened our doors, again, we didn't know what we didn't know and what we were doing. We're just kind of trying to figure out who we were. And our then general manager was out front with the doors open and a tie on. And these 2 friends of ours, they walk up and they're like, "Oh man, this place is gonna be way too fancy for us. We don't know." They walked in and they saw my brother, who was bartending for us at the time, and then one of them had served in Saudi Arabia with him. They're like, "Oh, Marty's here. We're good." And they continue to be friends of ours to this day. So I mean, just stuff like that is just like what gets me.
That story you tell about Green Flash, that makes me think of you're playing 1-on-1 against LeBron James and you score a basket.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, did I just do that? Maybe I belong on this court.
Right?
This is okay.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. Going back to when you guys first break onto the craft beer scene, Omaha, Nebraska, this area was still pretty new to that. And I found a quote from one of you guys that said, when you guys would hand your first versions of IPAs to people, they would cough when they drank it because they weren't used to that level of hops. Now it's just, pretty widely accepted. But back then, our palates hadn't developed that yet. What kind of education did you guys have to do to help people understand, hey, it's not just Miller Lite and Coors anymore. This craft beer thing is really cool. Give it a shot.
Interesting aspect to this, because back then, one, you want to be, the evangelist. You want to say that craft beer is the best beer.
We were.
And it's and I've crossed the line a few times, unfortunately, where you do it to the detriment of the other beers that have come before you, and Bud Miller Coors, whatever, and you say this stuff is the best. So when you do that, you immediately alienate the guy that loves Miller, that loves Bud, and so they're already put off by it, and then you gotta retrace your steps and get them to drink it. But I would say the first 5 years, we spent most of our waking moments, one, making the beer and running the business, but trying to get people to try it. And
at every craft fair, every beer, everything, that they would allow us to come out and sample it. And people would be like, they'd taste it and they'd think, wow, it's not bad. And we'd be like, right, it doesn't suck, right? Okay, I can work with that. I can jump off that bridge with you.
And then going through the education of, well, here's why, it tastes the way it does. And ultimately, we still say this today, we have 40 taps. And of those 40 beers, we just want you to find one. Find one beer that you enjoy, and that's your starting point, because then your palate will shift a little bit. I didn't like Nashville hot chicken the first time I had it. Well, so you start somewhere else, right? And then before you know it, you find you like spice. And at some point, you're eating the hottest Nashville hot chicken you can find, and that appeals to you. Same thing with craft beer. It's not that you move through the whole spectrum, but you find the areas that appeal to you most, and, go to another brewery, try their, product Y that matches, your product Y. And before you know it, as a craft beer connoisseur, you've found an ability to judge, an ability to rate, and, exist within the spectrum.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons, actually, that Great Nebraska Beer Brew Bash, I think Brew Bash is what we call it at the end, the Great Nebraska Beer Fest was created, was to give us, we didn't want to rely on other people to invite us to sample beer, so we created a platform for all the brewers at the time, which I think our very first beer festival in 2009.
That thing was very unique to this area. 25
breweries maybe, and 100 people. I don't know, something like that. It was crazy. But it gave us the control to try to showcase to consumers, look at all these different kinds of craft beer. Look at all these breweries out here that are making something you might like, something you might not like, but you don't have to. Here's an opportunity for, a set price for you to come in and check it all out. And we did that beer fest for 10 years. Yeah, 10 years. And it grew to 65 plus breweries, over 2,000, 3,000 attendees. So that was really an opportunity for us to take what we loved and our passion to the people, if you will, and say, learn to love what we love. Come on the journey with us. We will take you and teach you and find something that you love. And that was fun for me.
One of the bigger unique aspects of that beer fest is because we circulated within, the Vinny Chilurzo's, that kind of stuff. We were able to get many of those breweries that had nothing to do with Nebraska show up at our beer fest. And, it wasn't that we were paying them to show up. We attracted them. They wanted to be a part of what we were doing. And, each year you could have 5 to 8 breweries that you would never experience.
It was the only place that you probably were ever going to drink beer from them.
If you weren't at this beer fest. And, we also helped them get a foothold, in Nebraska or the Midwest. And, ultimately then the footprints of all these breweries began to widen and overlap. And it then took away from our ability to be unique. And if you look at the landscape today, there aren't a lot of beer fests anymore because they all became ubiquitous and, had the same brands. And if you've been to that one in Missouri, you've kind of already been to the one in Nebraska. So, again, it was a really cool era of education and we were happy to be a part of it.
It was kind of a challenge. Let me teach you. Let me find a beer that you like. Yep. Give me 5 minutes. So, yeah.
Another challenge that you guys had was expanding from a brew pub to a full-scale brewery, which is what you did in 2014, although I believe the plans for that started in 2011.
Yep.
How did you know the time was right? As the recession is starting to, fade a little bit, as people are starting to figure out what craft beer is, how do you know that this is the right time to expand?
What a funny topic. And I'm not criticizing, but it was, I wouldn't say a lot of luck, but it's like reading the tea leaves. Our barrel-aged beers were, each time we'd make a batch of barrel-aged beers, we'd reinvest the money. So you buy double the amount of barrels and double the amount of beer. And we were always sold out before the batch ever matured. And that captured the attention of a lot of distributors. And before you know it, we were in, I say we were in, we weren't really in, we were legal and distributing a little beer in 28 states. And in 28 states, you've captured half of, the United States of America, but this brewery or distributor up there might only get 50 cases, that kind of stuff. But it also created this demand that, we want a piece of Nebraska Brewing Company as well. And before you know it, we stumbled into a distributor in Texas. China picked us up. And, both of those distributors I just ignored for a while because I thought, no, that can't be real. And then when you finally sit down with them and realize how big they are, it's like, well, maybe we should try to get a little bit bigger brewery. And
we kind of had to decide. We said, okay, here we are. We are making and distributing as much as we possibly can. Like we were, again, Tyson was leading that charge, and we couldn't make any more beer than we were. And we've had to say, okay, is this who we want to be? Do we want to sit at this table and just be happy with this is who we are because it was really good? Or do we want to expand and get into distribution, get into canning, bottling? That was a whole different discussion. We had to convince a brewer that cans were better than bottles, but that's a different story. And say, we had to really analyze, like, who do we want to be and where do we want to be? And ultimately we decided that we wanted to be in the distribution side of it in a bigger fashion than we were, because there's no way we could have ever gone to cans and bottles in the facility alone in Papillion.
Kim, I believe this was you who had a quote who in talking about just kind of as the craft beer scene has grown, and it's not just you guys in upstream anymore, but there are a lot more players in this game now. You said we tend to call it co-opetition. We're here to make sure we're making beer better than the next guy, and that's what we'll always do, what drives us forward. But we want to make sure all of us succeed. How does that work? Like, I hear it so much from restaurant owners, and they talk about how a rising tide lifts all boats. How does that work in the craft beer scene?
I would say it's the same. I mean, and as we grew we kind of guesstimate, we were the 5th brewery in the state in 2007, and there's 50, 60 plus now, with probably more still in planning, which we try to tell people, don't do it. It's not that good. No, I'm kidding. But I mean, there's no way we get from 5 to 60 plus or 70 plus, whatever the number is, without helping each other out. And you want to be better than we always want to be the best. And I've said too, if you can't stand up in a room and say, I make the best pale ale, or I feel like my beer is the best, then maybe you should rethink what you're doing. Because you have to really believe in your own product, but you also want to believe in the next guy and help them out to a certain extent, or the next gal. For me, I mean, the women in the brewer in the industry are clearly outnumbered. So anytime we can help people be better and support the industry, because the better we are as an industry, the more we all sell.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah.
Both look at me.
I mean, I would stand by that. There's a certain level where you're like, okay, I'm not going to give you my trade secrets, but you need some filter, or you need this kind of hop, or you need this.
2 bags of malt because you're in short. Come on up.
Yeah.
We'll help you out.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, we're up against it on time. I know that you guys could tell stories all day, and I would love to listen to your stories all day because they are fantastic. But I got to get you out of here on this, because we've done so much talking about the past and where you guys have come from and how far you've come. But you strike me as people who are not, I mean, it's like the discussion at the brew pub table. We can stay here and we can be happy, or we can keep pushing forward. We can keep growing this thing. When you look into the future of Nebraska Brewing Company, what do you see?
You want to take it first?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I think in terms of the products, there's a lot of emerging things right now. There's RTDs, ready to drinks, which are the Trulies of the world, cocktails and vodka mix. That's eating into a really large share of the alcohol consumer at the moment. So as craft beers shares begin to, dwindle a little bit, we're seeing more breweries closing now than opening. So where do we position ourselves? What do we do with this? Do you want to go chase down the path of infusing seltzers with THC? Cute, but they're also going to be regulated at some point. So, man, it's this landscape of. I think we've got the brewery we need to adapt. I think we're still emerging from COVID. It's funny. It's so far behind us, but
not at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The impacts are still being felt.
100%.
Sure.
Yeah, and draft beer went to nothing basically because bars and restaurants were closed. Then it shot up again, and now the landscape is shifting. And if the big thing is read the material, what's going on in the industry, and keep pace with it. Failure to adapt is failure. And I think that's what we're up against. So if I look over the horizon, I used to say the horizon was 5 years away, and then the horizon kept getting closer. And the horizon now is 9 months away. Where do we want to be 9 months from now? And I think, honestly, we need to grow our footprint. We need to get back to a little bit of where we were before COVID hit. COVID, chopped off a lot of distributors that, in fact, a lot of those distributors aren't even here anymore. But, 9 months from now, I think we need a few more markets. I think we've got the expertise to make the beers those markets need and want. And I think it's just, here we go telling our story again.
Yeah, I think that you touched on a couple of things. So there's a whole, the beers your grandpa drank are not the beers that your dad drank or that you drink. And we're seeing that with the next generations now. They're drinking different things. So finding the ways to pull those generations back in and saying, hey, craft beer is really awesome. Come check us out. But for me, the other thing, he talks about going into other markets, which I'm totally on board with, but being also really solid in our own community and not just in the way of beer. We do a lot of work with not-for-profits, which I have such a passion for. I didn't realize how much until I got to start working with some of them. And so just really creating those roots in our own community is huge to me. And I think that's a long-term thing for me.
So I answered the question based on products, which didn't tell the whole story.
Well, I think those are both.
Yeah.
That's how we work together as a team.
Yeah, exactly. I think we need to be, when people think, what's a brewery in Nebraska? Nebraska Brewing Company. What's the best brewery in Nebraska? Nebraska Brewing Company. Where do you want to go because you want to support local, and the people that support local themselves, Nebraska Brewing Company? I want to fill all of those little
check
slots.
all those boxes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think, we could go down so many rabbit holes just based off that alone. Because I wanted to ask you guys about the winter markets that you hold. Basically, farmers markets during the winter, you hold them inside your brewery. That is the definition of supporting local. You are giving a voice to so many small businesses. I wanted to talk about brewery tours. I want to talk about pairing beer and food.
Yes.
Oh, I could talk to you guys
seriously.
all day long. You are fascinating people, and I know that you have so many more stories that we could tell. We got to cut it short today, but maybe we do another episode at some point. I wouldn't be opposed.
We would be honored.
Yep, we'll do that, and we'll see you Sunday if you're coming into the next market.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we have markets that are coming up.
Every other Sunday, winter markets.
Through the end of April. Yeah, we've partnered with folks at Omaha Winter Markets, so those are every other Sunday through the end of April, and then we'll have some in the summertime as well. Check out our Facebook page, Instagram, X. I'm trying to all the socials. Get
out there, people. Kim and Paul, thank you so much for giving me your time today.
Thank you
this
very
was an
much.
absolute blast.
Our pleasure.
Omaha, as always, thanks for eating with us.